Some documents don't vanish by accident. They disappear because someone planned every minute around them and trusted that time itself would absorb the blame. If you want the truth before it gets quietly rewritten, drop a like and subscribe. This case unfolds one controlled step at a time. At 4:32 a.m., Detective Evan Cross was still seated at his kitchen table, jacket draped over the back of the chair, a half-cold cup of coffee beside a neat stack of federal files. He had stopped reading minutes earlier, sensing the night wasn't finished with him yet. The knock came without urgency. No pounding, no pause, just pressure, firm, deliberate, professional. Outside stood Officer Daniel Morse, uniform immaculate despite the hour, posture held by habit rather than formality. His breath drifted into the cold Virginia air as he spoke. A request from the Office of Federal Records. Immediate presence required, restricted material, missing. Cross didn't ask why the call had come to him. He asked what kind of material. Preliminary trade drafts, Morse said. Not finalized, not public, not replaceable. That was enough. By the time Cross reached the government complex in Arlington, the sky had begun to pale, the kind of colorless dawn that revealed shapes but concealed intent. Inside, the building felt alert in the wrong way. Clerks moved too quickly. Conversations ended when footsteps approached. Eyes shifted toward doors instead of faces. He was met near the private wing by Deputy Director Lawrence Hale, whose composure was intact only through discipline. The missing document was a draft agreement related to Atlantic shipping corridors, sensitive, unfinished, and politically fragile. It had been secured inside Hale's personal briefcase. The office door had been locked. The security logs showed no forced entry, no alarms, no deviations. Cross noted the phrasing, not stolen, disappeared. The office itself supported the illusion, desk aligned, lamps still on, no scattered papers. The briefcase rested at the center of the desk, closed but unlocked. Cross resisted opening it. First impressions mattered, and evidence liked to speak when not interrupted. The carpet beneath the desk spoke first. Fibers flattened in a narrow arc. Someone had knelt there, recently, not in panic, with intention. Windows were sealed, hinges untouched. The lock showed no stress marks. Whatever happened had happened with permission, borrowed, copied, or assumed. Only 3 people had been in this wing overnight. Hale's sister Marion, reviewing a speech draft in the adjacent chamber. A junior administrative aide, Caleb Rowe, who claimed to have returned for a forgotten item. And Mrs. Nolan, the night facilities supervisor, whose routines were measured in minutes and rarely varied. Each of them placed themselves near the office shortly before midnight. Too close, too consistent. Cross stepped back into the corridor and studied the wall clock. It read 12:11. His wristwatch read 12:05. 6 minutes. Enough to shift a timeline. Enough to move a presence earlier or later without attracting suspicion. Enough to turn coincidence into cover. He returned his gaze to the closed briefcase, still untouched. The document hadn't vanished at midnight. It had been removed earlier, when someone believed no one would question the clock, the logs, or the people who trusted them. And whoever planned it hadn't rushed. They'd waited patiently for time itself to lie. Detective Evan Cross preferred repetition to speculation. People rarely lied cleanly twice. Details shifted. Timelines bent. Small errors appeared where confidence once stood. He gathered them again in the antechamber adjoining the office. Same chairs, same neutral lighting, a controlled environment. Cross wanted consistency or its absence. Marion Hale was questioned first. She sat composed, hands folded, posture exact. She repeated her account with precision. She had remained in the antechamber reviewing her brother's remarks until shortly before midnight. No interruptions, no visitors, no reason to enter the office. Cross asked about sounds. Nothing distinct, she said. The walls are insulated. Lawrence insisted on that years ago. He asked if she had moved. One brief walk into the corridor, she replied. I thought I heard someone approaching. When I looked, no one was there. She hesitated before adding one detail she hadn't mentioned earlier. There was a change in the air, she said. A draft, slight but noticeable, around 11:45. Cross noted it. Buildings didn't exhale without reason. Caleb Rowe was next. He sat too close to the edge of the chair, notebook clenched in both hands. His explanation came quickly, too quickly. He'd returned to retrieve an umbrella he believed he'd left behind earlier. He wasn't sure of the time. Somewhere near midnight. Cross asked where the umbrella had been kept. The West Corridor coat stand, Rowe said, then paused. I think. The stand had already been checked. Empty. Rowe corrected himself. Perhaps he'd taken it earlier and forgotten. He did that sometimes. Long hours blurred memory. Cross asked why Rowe had entered the private wing at all. The coat stand wasn't located there. I heard voices, Rowe said. I didn't want to interrupt. He insisted he hadn't approached the office door. Insisted he hadn't touched the briefcase. Insisted he hadn't seen anyone. His body said otherwise. Shoulders tight, breathing shallow, fingers white around paper that offered no protection. Mrs. Nolan answered last. Her statements were crisp, economical. She'd been dusting the West Corridor between 11:35 and 11:50. She passed the office once. The door was closed, nothing out of place. Then she added something new. A metallic sound, she said, brief, like a latch being adjusted, around 5 minutes to midnight. Cross asked how she was certain of the time. I keep a strict schedule, she replied. Dust doesn't allow improvisation. She also confirmed something else. The corridor felt colder than usual, she said. A draft, that corridor is sealed. When Cross finished, he dismissed them, but not their words. 3 people, 3 overlapping windows, 2 mentions of moving air, 1 sound that suggested access, not force. Cross returned to the corridor alone. He checked the briefcase latch, cool to the touch. If it had been opened recently, it would have retained warmth. It hadn't. That told him more than any statement. The document had not been removed during the window everyone described. It had been taken earlier, then covered by agreement, assumption, or fear. Someone had needed them all to anchor their memories to the same wrong moment. Cross closed his notebook. The next step wasn't another interview. It was the building itself. Because walls remembered what people forgot, and clocks sometimes lied on purpose. Buildings recorded movement long after people convinced themselves nothing had happened. Detective Evan Cross stood alone in the West Corridor, letting the silence settle. The lamps hummed faintly above him. The polished floor reflected light cleanly, almost too clean. Mrs. Nolan's work. Order imposed nightly, hiding nothing except what passed through too briefly to leave a mark. Cross requested the night access ledger. It arrived within minutes, carried by Officer Morse, thin and worn at the edges from years of routine entries. Cross opened it without hurry. He trusted paperwork more than people. Paper didn't improvise. Most of the log was dull. Deliveries, security checks, 1 name, 1 line, that was all it took. 11:58 p.m., visitor admitted, temporary clearance, signed authorization. Departure logged at 12:14 a.m. Cross reread it, slowly. A visitor. None of the 3 witnesses had mentioned anyone else. Not a consultant, not an aide, not a courier. Yet someone had entered the building, moved through secured space, and left again, calmly enough to be recorded without comment. Cross checked the authorization column. Signature, L. Hale. He closed the ledger. That changed the shape of the night. He walked back down the corridor, measuring distance with his steps. The visitor would have passed the antechamber, past the office door, past every place the others claimed to be standing. Yet no one had seen him. Cross stopped beneath the corridor clock again. It still ran 6 minutes fast. He checked his watch. The discrepancy held. If the clock was wrong, then the visitor hadn't arrived just before midnight. He'd arrived earlier than the draft was supposedly last seen. Cross requested the entry guard. The man, Frank Delaney, was solid, methodical, and unsurprised by questions. He described the visitor without hesitation. Gray suit, dark gloves, medium build, confident walk, knew exactly where he was going, carried a slim leather case. Cross asked if the visitor seemed nervous. No, Delaney said, moved like he belonged. The pass was produced next. It looked legitimate at first glance. Correct formatting, correct stamp, correct handwriting close enough to deceive anyone not looking for flaws. Cross looked for flaws. The stamp impression was uneven, the outer ring blurred. Not Warren Rushed, who had access to the stamp, Deputy Director Hale, administrative staff, the chief records clerk, not the night supervisor, not the junior aide officially. Cross returned the pass and walked back toward the office. Inside, he finally opened the briefcase. The interior lining was intact. No tearing, no panic. Whoever removed the document had done so carefully, respectfully almost. That suggested familiarity or intent beyond theft. In the corner of the lining, Cross found a single pale fiber. Cotton, fine, likely from a glove. He sealed it. The visitor hadn't broken in, he hadn't rushed, and he hadn't acted alone. Cross stepped back into the corridor and looked again at the clock. Someone had shifted time to move the visitor out of focus. Someone had wanted midnight blamed, because midnight was when everyone remembered standing still. He closed his notebook. The next question wasn't who entered the building. It was who inside had made sure no one noticed. Detective Evan Cross had learned early in his career that institutions rarely failed loudly. They failed quietly through procedure, habit, and people who believed themselves indispensable. The name at the center of that quiet confidence was Jonathan Mercer, Chief Records Administrator of the Office of Federal Records. Mercer arrived precisely when summoned, coat perfectly buttoned, expression neutral enough to suggest cooperation without vulnerability. He looked like a man accustomed to being trusted. Cross didn't waste time. Mercer's office sat 2 floors above the private wing, far from the briefcase and the corridor clock, yet deeply connected to both. From here, access was granted, passes issued, stamps accounted for, and signatures compared when necessary. "Walk me through your responsibilities," Cross said. Mercer complied smoothly. He oversaw visitor authorizations, controlled the official seal, audited the access ledger, and maintained procedural compliance. Nothing happened inside the building without passing through his systems directly or indirectly. Cross asked about the seal. "Stored in the secured cabinet," Mercer said. "Access limited. Logged." Cross asked who could open that cabinet. "Myself," Mercer replied, "Deputy Director Hale, and on occasion junior aides acting under instruction." "Caleb Rowe?" Cross asked. Mercer hesitated barely. "Yes," he said. "Rowe has retrieved materials for me before." Cross noted the pause. He asked about signature replication, whether drafts were ever prepared in Hale's name. Mercer smiled thinly. "Routine efficiency. When a superior is unavailable, preparatory drafts are sometimes signed for later confirmation. Nothing leaves the building without final approval." "But the signature exists," Cross said, "before the approval." "Yes," Mercer admitted. "The system assumes integrity." Cross let that sit. He produced the forged visitor pass and placed it on the desk. Mercer studied it carefully, too carefully. "The signature is close," Mercer said. "Not perfect. Close enough," Cross replied, "to pass a guard who trusts the system." Mercer nodded once. "Unfortunate." Cross asked about the corridor clocks. Mercer answered without thinking. "Facilities winds them nightly." "Winds," Cross repeated. "But who adjusts them?" Mercer stopped himself again too late. "Administrative oversight," he said. "Occasionally myself, seasonal changes." "Synchronization." Cross leaned back slightly. "Then you would know how 6 minutes could go unnoticed." Mercer's jaw tightened. 6 minutes is negligible." 6 minutes, Cross said calmly, "is the difference between presence and absence." Mercer said nothing. Cross shifted tactics. "Why would a visitor enter under Hale's name?" he asked. "Retrieve nothing visibly, leave calmly, and yet coincide with the disappearance of a sensitive draft." Mercer's fingers tapped once against the desk. He caught himself and folded his hands. "Perhaps," Mercer said carefully, "the visitor wasn't there to steal." Cross watched him. Perhaps he was there to confirm, Mercer continued, or to be seen. A decoy, Cross said. Mercer met his eyes for the first time. Possibly. Cross stood and moved toward the window. Below them, the courtyard remained empty, orderly, forgetful. The draft was removed earlier, Cross said, before midnight. The clock was adjusted to anchor memory to the wrong moment. The visitor created an external explanation. Mercer didn't deny it. Instead, he asked, "Do you know how many errors never get corrected because no one forces the system to confront them?" Cross turned back. "You forced it by endangering it," Mercer exhaled. "I exposed it. You exploited a junior aide," Cross said. "You manipulated routine. You falsified time." Silence stretched. Finally, Mercer spoke. "The document is safe." "That's not the standard," Cross replied. "The standard is trust." Mercer's composure fractured, not fully but enough. "You'll tell me where it is," Cross said, "and then you'll explain everything again, this time without hiding behind process." He closed his notebook. The system had spoken, and it had named the man who knew exactly how to bend it. Detective Evan Cross trusted reconstructions more than confessions. Words bent under pressure. Spaces didn't. He returned to the west corridor just after noon, when the building had resumed its daytime rhythm. Foot traffic softened traces, but not all of them. Some details survived movement, scuffs, residue, inconsistencies that cleaning couldn't erase without knowing they mattered. Mrs. Nolan accompanied him, her presence precise, disapproving of interruption but respectful of purpose. She watched his hands more than his face. Cross began with distance, from the security entrance to the antechamber, from the antechamber to Hale's office, from the office to the stairwell, measured steps, counted seconds. The visitor logged at 11:58, or rather, 11:52 by real time, could have reached the office door in under a minute. The stairwell provided an alternate path, darker, quieter, less observed. Cross asked Mrs. Nolan about sound. "Footsteps carry differently at night," she said. "Someone confident doesn't hesitate. Hesitation makes noise." Cross found what he'd expected on the third stair, a faint scrape on the metal edge. Not fresh enough to shine, not old enough to belong to routine wear. It angled inward. Someone descending, not climbing. He followed the stairwell down and noted a faint trace of tobacco, expensive, filtered, not used by staff. It lingered near the landing, faint but persistent. The visitor again. Cross returned to the office and examined the briefcase more closely. He checked the latch housing. The metal inside retained no warmth. That confirmed it. The document hadn't been removed during the supposed midnight window. He then inspected the carpet beneath the desk once more. Mrs. Nolan stiffened. "That fiber wasn't there this morning," she said. Cross nodded. "It was shed earlier." He compared it with fibers collected beneath the records cabinet upstairs. Same cotton blend, same pale weave. Gloves. Administrative issue gloves, the kind kept in bulk storage, not personal items. Cross asked Mrs. Nolan about gloves. "They're kept near the records room," she said. "For document handling, access controlled." Cross brought Caleb Rowe in next. Rowe looked exhausted, eyes red, posture collapsed. Cross didn't accuse. He asked Rowe to walk the route he claimed to have taken. Rowe hesitated at the stairwell. "I didn't go that way," he said quickly. Cross believed him. Fear avoided shadows. They reached the coat stand. Rowe stared at it as if seeing it for the first time. "I don't think my umbrella was ever here," he admitted quietly. Cross waited. "I thought I'd forgotten it," Rowe continued. "But I think I was told to check, to confirm something." "Told by whom?" Cross asked. Rowe swallowed. "Mr. Mercer." That was enough. Cross dismissed Rowe and returned to Hale's office, where Jonathan Mercer waited, seated, composed, but no longer comfortable. Cross laid the reconstruction out slowly. The adjusted clock, the early removal, the visitor serving as misdirection, the fibers, the stairwell, the gloves. Mercer listened without interruption. "You didn't need to steal the document," Cross said. "You needed it moved. Temporarily, you needed leverage." Mercer leaned back. "The system is brittle," he said. "Pressure reveals fractures." You created them, Cross replied. Mercer's eyes hardened. I exposed them. Cross shook his head. You risked an international negotiation to make a point. Silence followed. Finally, Mercer spoke again. The draft is intact. No copies were made. No foreign contact received it. That's not mitigation, Cross said. That's luck. Mercer looked away. Cross closed his notebook. There's still one thing you haven't explained, he said. Why the visitor needed to be seen leaving. Mercer didn't answer immediately, because the lie wasn't finished yet. Pressure did not break systems first. It broke people. Detective Evan Cross didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He allowed silence to do the work. Silence forced those involved to hear their own thoughts, and that was where mistakes surfaced. He started with Caleb Rowe again. Not in the antechamber, not in an office. In the small records room where Rowe spent most of his nights, surrounded by shelves that never judged him. The space smelled faintly of paper dust and oil, familiar, almost comforting. Rowe stood with his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. You weren't meant to be part of this, Cross said calmly. Rowe looked up, startled. You were meant to be useful, Cross continued. There's a difference. Rowe swallowed. His voice came thin. I didn't steal anything. I know, Cross said. You moved things, you followed instructions, you trusted the wrong person. Rowe's shoulders sagged. Mercer had framed everything as routine. Preparatory work. Efficiency. Cross-checks. He'd asked Rowe to retrieve the sealed days earlier, to handle drafts, to adjust clocks after a supposed scheduling discrepancy. Nothing illegal in isolation. Nothing alarming until it was assembled backward. You adjusted the corridor clock, Cross said. Rowe nodded slowly. He said it was off by a few minutes. How many? Cross asked. 6, Rowe whispered. Cross let that settle. And the night of the disappearance, he asked. Rowe hesitated. He told me not to worry about timing, said everything important had already happened. That was the crack. Cross left Rowe there and moved upstairs. Jonathan Mercer was waiting, composed again, mask repaired. He believed the worst was over. Cross hadn't arrested him yet. That gave Mercer hope. Hope made people careless. You used Rowe because he wouldn't question intent, Cross said. You trained him to value efficiency over verification. Mercer didn't deny it. You didn't need him to steal, Cross continued. You needed him to prepare the ground, open paths, normalize shortcuts. Mercer's jaw tightened. Every institution runs on shortcuts. Not like this, Cross replied. He laid out the final sequence. The document was removed earlier in the evening, before most staff anchored their memories. The briefcase was opened using access, not force. Gloves from bulk storage prevented prints. The corridor clock was adjusted to shift perception. Then the visitor entered. A controlled variable, a visible exit, a distraction that pointed outward. You created a false culprit, Cross said. Time itself. Mercer finally spoke. The visitor was meant to retrieve the draft if I failed. And when you didn't, Cross asked. He left empty-handed, Mercer said. As planned. Cross leaned forward. That's where you miscalculated. Mercer frowned. You assumed the absence of panic meant success, Cross said. But the building remembered more than you expected. He produced the fiber evidence again, then the tobacco trace, then the stairwell scuff. You moved too confidently, Cross said. You forgot that confidence leaves patterns. Mercer stood abruptly. You're framing intent after the fact. No, Cross replied evenly. I'm mapping it. Mercer's composure cracked just enough. Where is the draft? Cross asked. Mercer exhaled. Long, tired. Behind the visitor foyer, he said. Inside the old umbrella stand panel, temporary, safe. Cross nodded. He turned to leave, then paused. There's still one thing unresolved, he said. The visitor. Mercer looked up sharply. You trusted him, Cross continued. But you never controlled him. Mercer said nothing. And in that silence, Cross understood. The visitor hadn't come just to assist. He'd come to measure how far the system could be pushed, and whether Mercer was still useful. The umbrella stand was exactly where Mercer said it would be. Old. Decorative. Forgotten by everyone who assumed relevance expired with fashion. Cross watched as maintenance loosened the rear panel. Inside, wrapped in a plain archival sleeve, lay the missing draft, untouched, unmarked, intact. No copies, no alterations, no fingerprints. Deputy Director Lawrence Hale released a breath he'd been holding since before dawn. Relief crossed his face first, then something harder and more permanent. "You endangered negotiations," Hale said quietly, his voice controlled but strained. "You endangered trust." Jonathan Mercer didn't respond. Stripped of authority, procedure no longer shielding him, he looked smaller, a man suddenly aware that systems do not protect those who misuse them. Cross handed the document back to Hale. Recovery was only half the job. Understanding was the other half, and the more expensive one. Mercer was escorted out without spectacle. No raised voices. No audience. Institutions preferred their failures silent, filed away like administrative errors rather than moral ones. Cross remained behind. He stood once more beneath the corridor clock. Maintenance had reset it. The hands now aligned correctly, the second hand moving forward without deception. 6 minutes returned to their rightful place. Hale joined him. "If you hadn't noticed the clock, I would have noticed something else," Cross replied. "Time resists lies people don't." They walked the corridor together. It had already filled with ordinary motion. Clerks passing, phones ringing, doors opening and closing with purpose. Normality reasserted itself quickly, as though nothing fragile had been exposed. In the records room, Caleb Rowe waited. Cross didn't accuse him, didn't lecture, he explained. "You were useful because you were reliable," Cross said, "not because you were careless." Rowe nodded slowly, eyes downcast, relief mixed with shame. The realization that loyalty without understanding could still cause damage. "What happens now?" Rowe asked. "You learn where efficiency ends," Cross said, "and accountability begins." Rowe understood. That lesson would follow him longer than any reprimand. Later, Cross reviewed the visitor ledger one final time. E. Morrow, the gray-suited man, remained unresolved. No address, no affiliation, no history beyond a single precise entry. Hale studied the name. "So he just disappears?" "No," Cross said. "He was never meant to stay. The visitor hadn't come to steal, he'd come to observe, to test access, to measure silence. Someone who moved between institutions, evaluating how far authority could bend before it broke. Mercer believed he was forcing reform. In truth, he'd been assessed himself. By the time Cross prepared to leave, the building had fully reset. The corridor smelled of polish. The stairwell was quiet. The clock ticked honestly, indifferent to what it had helped conceal. At the entrance, Hale stopped him. "You saved us from more than embarrassment," he said. "You saved us from ourselves." Cross paused, then answered. "Systems fail," he said. "People decide whether they fail loudly or quietly." Outside, night settled over Arlington, orderly, controlled, and deceptively calm. Cross took one last look at the building before turning away. The case was closed, but the mechanism remained. Time could be adjusted, records could be forged, access could be borrowed, but eventually something always noticed. If this case kept you thinking, drop a like and subscribe for more investigations like this. And tell me, do you think Mercer acted out of frustration or ambition?